Hello there, Sean B.W. Parker here. It's been quite the year for cultural politics, 2023. So thought I'd have a quick recap of it all. Um, Starting with Mr. Andy Malkinson, who in the summer was finally exonerated after 17 years in prison, 20 years in total since being convicted for something he didn't do, to rape, and it was Greater Manchester Police were sitting on evidence since 2006 that he wasn't the person responsible. And according to the author Bob Woffington, if there was even anything to answer for in the first place. So there was somebody else arrested. Andy Malkinson spent 17 years inside, out a couple of years ago, and has now cleared his name. And that was headline news for a few weeks, a few days, justifiably enough, when people realise how badly the justice system can go wrong. Followed quickly and replaced in the headlines by Mr. Russell Brand, who, in his new career as a political activist and commentator, has been upsetting many people in the mainstream media and exposing with boldness the corruption endemic in lots of globalist agendas, as he would see it. And so he was exposed in September, October by the Sunday Times and by Channel 4 for his old behaviours as a younger man, with allegations of rape and sexual assault and controlling behaviours, all that sort of thing. Has indeed been questioned by the police a few weeks later. Nothing's happened as yet, just before Christmas, and it's has been commented on by many how there seems to be a certain pattern of high-profile alpha male is taken down by certain allegations, whatever the veracity of them. But this time it's so high media, things are so skeptical of the media that he's been listened to in many quarters, waiting to see how it turns out for him. Kevin Spacey, around the same time as that, was exonerated for the second time in Britain. The first time having been in the US a year before for allegations against him of sexual assault. And he was kind of cleared of all of the charges against him at the same time, in pretty much an inversion of the believe the victims narrative. So it's the person accusing him was Mr. Something Rapp, who was a Star Trek actor, and of taking him to bed at some point under the influence of alcohol. Kevin Spacey admits he used to have an issue with alcohol and also was exposed himself as gay when the first things were accused at the time of the first wave of Me Too. And it's been rumbling on since then. But over the last 2 years, juries on both sides of the Atlantic, or is it juries or the courts themselves, have decided that it didn't meet the bar for sexual assault. So if there's a suspicion that Me Too era things have been overdone, it has been established in his case that however famous you are and respected, certain just because of that, it's no reason to just bin and cancel people. So he's a brilliant actor, and people are hoping that he gets back to his best, and he seems to be being offered things again. So good luck to Spacey. Mr. Philip Schofield, concurrently, was that spring or summer 2023, as the host of ITV This Morning, admitted he'd been in an unwise relationship with a young runner for that show for some time, who he'd met some years before, but cheated on his wife, kept it secret, and continued, which is it wouldn't appear to be some massive thing but there's obviously a bunch of online stuff about when did they meet, how old was he when they met, was it over the 15, 16 mark when they started or not, all that kind of thing. Anyway, Philip was defenestrated from this morning. Out he goes, followed by Holly Willoughby, his erstwhile host, a couple of months later after a bunch of quite intense social media trolling, including a guy who had been planning to kidnap her or something. It got to her, and off she went. So they're basically a watershed year for this morning. Not so much sofa stuff. It appeared with the Philip Schofield thing that it was very much media versus media, PR versus PR. So when he'd gone down, all of a sudden Hugh Edwards at the BBC was going down as well, like some sort of tit for tat of the PR managers exposing skeletons in various cupboards in order to get back at some other PR somewhere else. The reality of what the media does in London and everywhere else. And so Hugh Edwards for sending pictures to a younger man and apparently going through some difficult time in his life. And so he disappears from the BBC screens after 20 years of delivering the news in a very safe Welsh accent for 6 o'clock regularly. Gone. And there was a massive hoo-ha about that at the time. It's gone pretty quiet since then. And, the private lives of all these high-profile individuals, are they our property? We sort of like to think so, don't we? Well, that seems to be the impression. And that's why they keep getting so royally shafted, if you pardon the expression. Mr. Lawrence Fox, who's the leader of Reclaim and a bit of a political commentator in his own right at the moment about all things woke, and he, stridently goes against it all after being called out for being called a racist on Question Time, BBC's Question Time a couple of years ago, when he called out somebody in the audience for being racist. It's his way of sort of personal honesty that he does. And anyway, he was cancelled after that by his agent, couldn't get any work, and so he seems to take things extremely personally, and he's also at the time of various marches to London over ULEZ and October the 7th and Hamas things. Lots of people supporting Hamas, not people supporting Palestine. The marches going through London. He would come out and take down their Palestinian flags. He would go to. He would burn the Pride flag as being an inappropriate replacement for the Union Jack. All these kind of things that appear like stunts, but are also quite heartfelt howls against the woke coming from Lawrence. But he went on Dan Wootton's show in September, October, and said of a journalist for Politics Joe, Anna Santina, I wouldn't shag her. To which Mr. Wootton laughed because it seemed all very bantery and jokey, and it appeared that Lawrence had misunderstood the difference between a Zoom call and being on national television, which can happen when you're working from home, and possibly had a glass of wine or two, 9:30 on a Friday, and for a week was absolutely slaughtered in the papers, who had a reason to once again bin him for saying the wrong thing. Yes, it was crass. Yes, it was old school sexism, but also Santina herself on other things had said I wouldn't shag him about on a bunch of other tweets. So when you apply the scimitar of justice, it's off he goes. And Dan Wootton, I think, has been suspended since then. And Calvin Robinson for sticking by his pals. These chaps do tend to stick together in a Boris Johnsonian sort of loyalty. Was also binned. So, these characters have been criticising GB News for pretending to be the home of free speech, but they're not. Who knows? Up to the viewer, isn't it? Mr. David Mottershead, who is an army veteran, went up against family court barrister Charlotte Proudman, who is a strident feminist online and regularly tweets in what appears to be misandric, man-hating tweets coming from a legal barrister, which is problematic for her industry as law, who are meant to be, when they're not in that court, keeping a reasonably cool head. But Proudman does seminars allegedly in social revolution, so all sorts of things. But Mr. David Mottershead is an emotional man with suspected autism, things like this, but an activist basically for men's rights. But that's not the red flag that you might see it as, when his stuff is so consistently trying to apply conventions of old school dignity and honor to being a man, that sort of thing. But he made the mistake of sending a picture of himself or another sort of soldier, it doesn't really look like David, with a gun to Proudman, and this appeared like harassment. And but went to court, and a restraining order was granted against David, but also the main charge of harassment was found not guilty of. So there was some sort of a balance in the verdict. Proudman goes often against men. She's quite litigious, being within that world herself, and she's fighting a social fight. She probably won't deny that. And she also took down another retired police inspector for harassment. So she won't have it, and the nature of what it is often seems to need to go to the courts, and the lawyers always win. And of course, she's a lawyer, so make of that what you will. Mr. Luis Rubiales helmed the women's football team to victory in the Women's Football World Cup for Spain, and afterwards planted a smacker on one of the team members, which was captured by the video, and she celebrated that in the tour bus with a bottle of champagne, kind of displaying the video happily enough. And then within 24 hours, somebody had seen the other side of that kiss, because he grabbed her and just kissed her without asking, and may have got into the ear of the player to say, do you realise how incredibly sexist that was in an imbalance of power? So I hadn't thought about that. Or maybe she had. Anyway, it went televisual, headline grabbing, and Luis Rubiales for a couple of days was the reincarnation of Hitler himself in Madrid, for having kissed this woman. It all seems now a bit like what there was some talk about him being sued for sexual assault. Maybe that's still going on. And what would have appeared about 10 years ago as a massive overreaction is now headline news, guaranteed to get a bunch of eyeballs and clicks. And yet again, as with all the other people we're talking about here, another man becomes a victim of it for sort of spontaneous behaviour, really. It would just be good to know what each of them actually felt in conflict resolution. But the media doesn't really care about conflict resolution, however much it says it does. All of these cultural politics were, these little human issues, were knocked into a cocked hat by the events of October the 7th, when Hamas terrorists invaded southern Israel on a historical day where something happened 30 years ago with the Israel, I forget the details of, and they executed 1,400 people, which is a vague term for what actually happened that morning. And there was rape and murder and decapitations of babies, terrible pictures coming online in real time. And it was an absolutely dreadful day for for Israel. And the IDF responded swiftly with monumental vengeance, and still going on. And it's been catastrophic for both sides, for Hamas breaking a ceasefire in the most vile way, which all journalists had to go and sit through, watching the reality of, like some awful extended snuff movie, which has kicked up many things and made everyone think, well, whatever I'm going through, at least I'm not in Gaza right now. That has been that's the reality of first world, the viewing of these awful TikTok videos or whatever. And anyway, as a non-Jew, or Palestinian for that matter, I'm observing and reporting on the difference between the stories I often write about with the human issues that we're talking about, and then something like that, which then sends the right and the left into a place of self-reflection where things might seem just culture war-y, as in who has the upper hand in this and who has the upper hand in that from week to week, which PR firms doing down the other, politics. And then that, which is actual war, a pogrom, which is an unfashionable word for a political attack against Jewish people specifically. And we've been witnessing the long tail of that now for a good few weeks. And Elon Musk made a comment which he liked the post of somebody which appeared to be an anti-Semitic comment. It's difficult when there's a bunch of comments out there, especially when you're Elon Musk with 80 million followers on his rebranded X from Twitter, or however many followers there are, where it's going to be liking and boosting a lot of things, because you just get the like of his thing and you'll be up by 20,000 followers immediately anyway. This is the economy of social media. And he liked something. Then a bunch of big organizations, specifically Disney, said they're not going to advertise on X anymore because he's supporting anti-Semitism. This is Musk, who is a notoriously apolitical free speech guy. I certainly see him like that. Everyone might have an opinion on the world's richest man, the white South African, having become that from making the most evolutionary impact out there, going with Tesla cars, which are green. He's arguably done a lot more for the green movement than Greta Thunberg, as he might say himself. And anyway, he got all those companies said they're not going to advertise on that anymore. He said at a speech, are you going to blackmail me with money? As in, the subject of money was so beneath him, which was amusing and piquant and useful. And he told Disney, etc., to go fuck yourselves because of it. And it was a memorable, to say the least. And it's good to, whether it's his self-diagnosed Asperger's or anything else, has that direct line to the truth beyond money. And there's a big sense of social justice going on in him, because he's obviously constantly having to batter back accusations of various things, being in the state that he is. So there's Elon, and then which shoehorn gently into Prince Harry winning 15 of 33 charges he'd brought against the media, specifically the Mirror Group in the UK, helmed at the time by Piers Morgan, who wasn't actually named in the in the case, but or might have been a witness, not sure. But Piers came out and said Prince Harry wouldn't know the truth if it slapped him around his Californian tanned face, memorably, after Harry had won this stage of 4 similar things he's got going against the media for hacking, for lying, for being generally dastardly against him and Meghan. So, and that was just before Christmas, slightly less intense or sexy indeed than all the other aforementioned. But what a year when the media itself almost becomes a story on an increasing basis, whilst the newspapers lose their power and social media increases theirs. You can probably expect much more of this. Happy Christmas. See you next year.